Welcome, everybody. This is an inaugural session of a webinar series called Just Make It. This is sponsored by Maker Bhavan Foundation. I am Hemant Kanakia, a founder of Maker Bhavan Foundation. Maker Bhavan Foundation is a California-based charity organization created by a bunch of IIT alumni from both US as well as India. And we have a number of programs we run at a number of universities in India. Our mission, to summarize it very briefly, is to reimagine the engineering education in India. We are focused mostly on education and not on entrepreneurship or not on research aspects, which are both critical as well for having a great university. We believe that some of our top institutions have a very good education at the undergraduate level, but it can be a lot better and become on par with what you get to see or receive as an undergraduate education in top universities like Stanford and MIT and Caltech. What we do is we provide there are 3 or 4 different types of activities we do. One of them, which is our focus on getting students to actually learn how to do real engineering, is to make things. We, as an organization, provide grants to universities that participate with us to create an academic maker spaces, which are 24/7 open facilities where the students from any disciplines can come together with an idea of their own and build their own stuff. We have extended that to also go towards many of the classes using those facilities to incorporate into what we call a project-based learning. So that's one aspect of what Maker Bhavan Foundation does. We have also funded a collaborative classrooms. I think the model of having all students face a blackboard and teacher giving a talk and then ended up with a midterm and a quiz and all that kind of that's a little dated model. And I think we think that it's good to learn in groups. So the classrooms are being rearranged in a way that facilitates group interaction. We also have a number of programs that actually encourage students to be innovative. I don't mean to actually go through and explain all different programs we do in that category, but 2 I would mention. One is an Invention Factory, which is a program run by 2 US-based faculty visiting India, working with the Indian faculty members to actually teach students how to invent by inventing. You know, at the end of this 7-week summer workshop, the students not only have gone all the way from coming up with an idea that is patentable and building a prototype and actually writing a provisional patent. And the last 2 years that we ran before COVID vacation hit all of us, or the COVID induced isolation hit all of us. We had run the classes at IIT Gandhinagar, this workshop at IIT Gandhinagar with about 20 to 25 students each year. And that has generated 40 provisional patents filed. Some of them are quite interesting ideas they come up with. What's really interesting is that they go all the way from idea to actually building something and writing a patent. and actually learning how to research whether something is patentable or not. We also have another program that is a nationwide Vishwakarma Prize, which was an inaugural season this year, which was focused on rewarding innovations coming from engineering students on a water and sanitation based things. And that's something that's ongoing right now. So in the middle of August, I think, of this year, we will have some winners, which will be awarded prizes, cash prizes, and all the jamelas that go with it. So those are on the making side. I think one of the other deficiency that we see is that many of us feel after having graduated that there are some essential skills that we don't learn while we are in universities. And so we have created a series of courses which are focused on communications in a business setting, also personal skills like critical thinking, problem solving, and decision making, as well as applied basic finance and application of finance. I think some of those things we learn as we go along in our career and life, but it can be taught in a more systematic manner, and which is what we have done. These are a series of 10 courses which are designed by an Harvard University's ex-dean of social sciences, using a new framework called active learning. And some of the participating colleges have started using them to teach them to the undergraduate students at the moment. Again, I think there are a number of other programs that I leave out, but I don't want to take up an entire space. This is not my time, or this is not the Maker Bhavan time to actually chew up. I would like to actually go ahead and introduce the host of this webinar series, Mr. Ajay Lavakare. Ajay is an IIT Delhi Bachelor's Technology. Gee, I forget how long ago, but it's certainly a lot younger than me. I'm a 1975 batch, so he's a bacha. So he has also done a master's in structural engineering from Stanford University. And after having worked in Japan for maybe 2-3 years or so, he came back and worked in California at a place called RMS, which is, I think, a Risk Management Science Institute, a company started by his advisor at Stanford University. And then he eventually migrated to India and is currently based in Delhi. In Delhi, he founded a RMSI, which was a joint venture with RMS. In fact, RMSI was actually touted as one of the best employers in the country for a long time. I think after the company got acquired, he turned his attention to being an angel investor. He has invested in many India-based companies, startups, through platforms like India Angel Networks and Stanford Angels and Let's Venture. He's a founder or a co-founder of Stanford Angels Networks in India. Gee, I don't know. There's so much more facets of him that I can go on for a while, but it's time for me to conclude and let Ajay take over. Ajay, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks a lot, Hemant. Really excited to be launching this webinar series where we've called it Just Make It, but we're going to be focusing on people who are actually making and building things. There's been a lot of attention on software entrepreneurs, but we think that it's time to shine the spotlight on some amazing work being done by makers, builders, And I'm very excited to try this out and see how it goes. And I'm equally excited to welcome our first guest of this webinar series, Nish Chasmawala. I've known Nish now for 10 years, Nish, right? And a brief about Nish, and he'll introduce himself as well, but he has a bachelor's in science in plastics engineering from the University of Amherst. He also is a fellow of the Stanford India Biodesign program. In between the two, he worked in the US. He did a startup that I don't know much about. He also has worked at Johnson & Johnson and another company called, I forget, it was with a K. But would love to, during the course of the next 20 minutes, learn a little bit more about Nish's background. Currently, he is the co-founder and CEO of an emerging, exciting medical devices company called Consul Medicals. And Consul is building several devices. They currently have 2 devices out in the market called Cora and Kiwi, and Nish will tell us more about those. He's also got, I think, several products in the pipeline, many patents that he has filed, and looking forward to learning a little bit about his journey and trying to understand, what drives him and what keeps him awake at night and what he's looking forward to. So with that, Nish, I'll just briefly hand it over to you before I start my questions to add anything in the introductions that I might have missed.
I think, thank you, Jay. I think I sort of echo what you said. I'm really excited to be here. This is probably as close to an IIT I would get. So I'm really excited to be here. Nothing really keeps me up at night. There's just too much to do, going through the day, trying to hit the milestones. And, by the end of the night, you're so fatigued. I sleep good, wherever, on flights, in hotels, at home. So I'm okay with that. Yeah, I think you covered pretty much everything. Background is medical devices, about 22 years in the medical devices industry. Over this time, sort of launched multiple products from idea to commercial launch in US, Europe, Japan. Wanted to do something in India for India. So moved back to India in 2008, 2009. Met my wife. Actually, I was at IIT Delhi and AIMS. Met my wife, now my wife. There. So I guess I'm grounded in India. Running a medical devices company from India. We have 62 full-time employees in Delhi and nine sort of full-time in US. And yeah, scaling fast, 5 products from ideas to commercial launch based out of India. And yeah, growing fast. But again, very excited to be here. I'm sort of happy to tailor the conversation towards the needs of our audience. I know there are like a lot of questions and sort of unique insights they're looking for. So I'm going to pause here, hand it over to you, Ajay, and answer any questions that you may have curated or that you may have.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Nish. So just by way of kind of how we're going to do this, so maybe, Q&A with me for about 15 minutes more. And then we will, I also encourage the audience to enter any questions in the chat window. And we will take a look at those questions, and the organizers will provide some of those questions to you. I can read them out and you can answer them. So we'll have about 15 minutes of questions from the audience after our conversation. Okay. And what I'm trying to learn in the next 15, 20 minutes, Nish, is about your journey, your story. Happy to get a little technical because I think our audience, which is mostly students from engineering colleges, will be fairly technical. So, we can talk about the various stages of your product development from, idea, POC, proof of concept, to prototyping, to actual low volume production and whatever else. So, don't be afraid to throw in some jargon. But more importantly, I think, really want to understand your story. So starting with perhaps, what's the origin story, right? Because every venture has like the story about, what triggered either the problem or the realization that there was a problem, and then subsequently the ideas behind how that problem could be solved. So tell us a little bit, Nish, about, what was the origin story for what you did?
Like I said, my background is medical devices, and sort of when I was doing this fellowship at Stanford and Ames, uh, I was actually looking at problems that sort of met all the large market criteria, VC criteria, problems that are latent. What I mean by is like something that is obvious out there, but something that nobody has looked at for a long time. So we're looking for latent clinical needs. And through the Stanford program, we actually had like 300 problems that could have been solved. And for whatever reason, we went through a filtering process and came up with the most unglamorous, unsexy need of them all. It's around incontinence management. And the reason why we chose that was actually both personal as well as economical. But we had seen this thing at hospitals. We had seen, incontinence being sort of managed in a domestic setting within some family members. So there was a personal sort of impetus to get into this space. But again, it met all the large market criteria. One, nobody was solving this problem. $4 billion market, just right off the gates on incontinence. Adjacent markets, more like $12 billion. So it met a lot of those criteria. And yeah, we started that journey around 2011, 2012, and been at it for about 10 years now. So yeah, I'm going to pause here again.
Sorry. And so for perhaps some of the students who don't really understand, what exactly you're solving, can you be a little more graphic maybe, or a little more like direct about what exactly you're solving for?
Yeah, I hope everybody's had their dinner or getting ready for whatever. But so incontinence is basically an inability of a person to manage their own stool or urine output. So if you imagine, let's say, for example, I was to get stroke or something, and if I'm lucky enough, an ambulance is going to pick me up, I get to the hospital, and most likely I will survive. But there are certain things that are guaranteed. Within 24 hours, they're going to put a feeding tube in through my nose. They're going to put a urinary catheter through my urethra. And then after 24 hours, there is nothing for stool management. So you'd go to an old-fashioned diaper and start doing that. And that causes dermatitis, maceration, which means, skin becomes red, skin starts breaking down. So that is incontinence. Similarly, when you can't manage urine, that's called urine incontinence. So the problem is it's a neuromuscular disorder where your brain cannot control the functions that normally are being controlled by the body because of a primary clinical condition. But on the economical side of things, what happens is when somebody doesn't when somebody has incontinence, there are a lot of skin issues. And in most hospital settings now, including India, hospitals get penalized for not taking care of the patient. So if somebody comes to a hospital with a perfect skin and they have incontinence, and either you have a dermatitis or a maceration, or because you're not turning the patient around, you end up with pressure injury or pressure ulcer, worst case scenario. Those have economic penalties, and sometimes those penalties run into thousands of dollars. So what we decided to solve was sort of first principles. How do we get to a solution that avoids the diaper altogether? What if we go to a catheter that is internal inside the anatomy, but bypasses the need for a doctor or a trained user? And what does that solution look like? So that's the journey we began on the stool management side. So that's a sort of a longish definition of incontinence. But that was the impetus and where we started on the Cora stool management side. I'm happy to sort of get into details of the product, but that was the sort of origin of Cora stool management kit.
Got it. So, tell us a little more about the phases or the steps that you went from, sort of idea, to POCs, to actually engineering prototypes, into maybe perhaps some beta manufacturing, then moving, what were these steps that you actually took, Nish, to get from the idea that, you wanted to build something that was better, maybe cheaper, more convenient, less intrusive than what was the current alternatives, which are diapers. And I think they're like these balloon catheters as well. So walk us through the steps between, the time you started 2010, 11, to kind of, the product actually getting to the market. And
Yeah.
I also know that you had initially planned to look at the Indian market. So, the focus, I recall, had been on affordability. And then you also pivoted because you saw there were larger opportunities. So walk us through that as well.
Yeah. So basically, the way to sort of think about the steps is, medical device is highly, highly regulated. As you may appreciate, you don't want to put anything in our family members, any devices in our loved ones that have not gone through a rigorous sort of clinical testing, evidence generation. So just by sort of generalization, a class 3 device, which is the most comprehensive, most sophisticated device, takes on an average anywhere between 10 to 12 years before the product even hits the market. A class 2 device will take, which is where the Cora stool management kit falls into. It takes anywhere between 5 to 7 years before somebody's going to see a first dollar out of it. And the way classifications work is slightly technical, but it's more risk-based. So for example, anything that is going to be implanted inside the body, below the skin, inside, close to a major organ, for more than 30 days, that is a class 3 device. So that's right off the gates, at least 10 years. Then class 2 is anything between 6 hours to 29 days. That's the class 2 device. And that's where we fall under. And anything that is less than 6 hours, it can be a class 1 or class 2 device, depending on the risk that the patient has. So in a class 2 device, which is where we started, our journey was about 3 years of actually just benchtop research. And in a nutshell, what we have is, I'm not sure if everybody's familiar with a stent. It's a lattice that is meant to keep organs or primarily blood vessels open. So for Cora, what we did was we actually invented the first stent for a GI tract. And as you may know, a stent is something that is designed to remain open or keep things open at all times because that's what's used in the blood vessels. But in the case of a GI tract, what happens is there's constant peristaltic contraction. So the GI tract is basically contracting and releasing sort of enzymes, fluids, and that is how the GI motility functions. So for us, the biggest challenge initially was, which took almost 2 years, is what is the right pressure where you put a stent inside the GI tract, where your stent will stay in place, does not migrate, does not cause any necrosis, which is injury or bleeding, sort of capillary compression, so to speak, and not cause any trauma or foreign body sensation. If you put something inside the GI tract, the first thing the brain is going to think is like, hey, there is a foreign body, and either you're going to try and puke it out or poop it out. And how do you sort of prevent that? By tricking the brain that this is a native sort of temporary organ inside. So that took us 2 years. Once we had that, as you can appreciate, multiple sort of iterations to get that perfect radial pressure. That is the core technology. That's where our patents are around. And we've got pretty broad indication. Pretty much, we are the first GI stent with that radial pressure indication. So much larger sort of spectrum to go after, but focuses incontinence. And then once you have that, then you start basically working towards form factors. Is this going to be deployed by a gastroenterologist in an inpatient setting or an outpatient setting? Is your user a nurse? In Indian markets, is your user a family member or somebody that comes temporarily to manage the patient? So you start working towards those form factors and multiple sort of design concepts, prototyping to design for a specific audience. Obviously, it's sort of going in parallel, right? You're sort of working towards a market segment, but the choice of the market segment is being driven by economics. Which market is my first go-to market? Where will I see least amount of competition or highest chance of traction adoption? So we go through that, and once we have narrowed down, so in our case we chose ICU patients because that's where the biggest clinical impact was. You can save somebody's lives and you can help hospitals save money. So it was sort of both a clinical as well as a commercial decision. But yeah, we chose that. And once you've got through the research, once you have a product that works conceptually, you sort of bifurcate and take two potential routes. In a class 3 device, you'd go and enter an animal study whereas you basically start doing evidence. Whereas on a class 2 device, you would identify low risk patient population and do a first in human study. And then, slowly, once we have that evidence, you go towards a safety study where you're proving your product is safe. You're not going to injure anybody. There's no side effects. And then the third step is, you go and do an efficacy study. Does your product do what it is intended to do? Does it interfere in other overall care? So once you have this first in human safety efficacy, that's when you're ready to go. People would, go and do publications and stuff. But realistically, you want to go and try starting clinical evaluations or pilots in small hospitals. Just convince somebody to, use it. And once you have adequate, maybe 3-4 hospital data, that's when you're ready for a commercial launch. So long process, it takes a while, it requires tenacity, it requires patient capital, but it's a rewarding journey at the end of the day.
Really fascinating, Nish. So I guess, two things come to mind. You talked about the need for capital, and you talked about the need for sort of, tenacity. So how did you approach the capital question? Because, investors are used to a certain time frame during which they want to see returns. For angel investors, particularly, that could be anywhere from sort of 3 to 5 years, maybe if you're patient, 6 or 7 years, but they are looking for shorter exits, and hardware and medical devices in particular are known to take a long time to come to market, and you really don't even know whether you're going to succeed until the device is actually out in the market. So how did you approach that challenge of patient capital?
That's a good question. So I actually had the undue advantage of being a failed entrepreneur the first time around. So I had started a company in 2003 and ran it. It didn't work out. About $60,000 on credit card debt, and but it didn't work out. I was young. I was able to recover, and I joined somebody else's startup in Silicon Valley, and we eventually grew that from a small company to $600 million in revenue, and eventually exited for $4.2 billion. So that had a different perspective. That gave me a different perspective, some sort of credibility. But the way we approached this thing is, until we had first in human data, we did not reach out to any investors. Luckily, we were at AIMS and IIT. We had friends in the industry, so we were able to sort of get to a first in human. It doesn't have to be very elaborate, 10 patients. But you're basically showing an investor that the R&D risk is off the table. You're showing an investor that the clinical risk is off the table. And then you've got a resume or a team that shows that, okay, now I can navigate the regulatory FDA or CE approval process. I can sort of go through that. And then the next would be commercial distribution challenges. So you're taking risks off the table. So it's key to take some of these things off the table before you start approaching investors. Otherwise it's basically a shot in the dark. And to answer your second part of your question, I think investors are also like entrepreneurs, right? There are some that sort of gravitate towards big, hard design problems, and they want to solve it by invention. They're okay with that cycle. I think from an entrepreneur perspective, it's very important to be honest and be transparent and let them know what the sort of cycle is going to be like. Don't promise overnight, revenue or anything. But yeah, take risks on the table, plan your milestones, and talk to the right investors, and that should be, a good strategy, I think.
Okay, sounds easy when you kind of lay it out like a recipe for success, but we all know that it isn't at all what it sounds like, and they're usually really low points, challenges, at times you feel like this is not worth it. So maybe if you could open up, my request to you is maybe could you open up and talk about some of the really low points and tough, parts of the journey where you thought this is not going to work out. And I'm sure we hear a lot about the successes. We hear a little less about those low, tough periods. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, I was joking when I said I sleep well at night because I'm here in Minneapolis. I can't disclose the hospital, but we are actually piloting a brand new product that took us about 3.5 years of research, and it's ready for clinical evidence. So I'm here doing that. So the medical devices, the low points is, like I mentioned, our go-to market is ICU patients. By law of averages, about a third of patients that enter the ICU are not going to make it out. They're there for whatever, multiple comorbidities. Now you have a brand new sort of invention device that you spend 3 years, 4 years inventing, researching, and it's not just you. I mean, it's your team. Like I said, we've got 70 plus people. So I mean, they've put in their heart and soul. And you come in and you put the device in, and you sort of waiting 24 hours, 48 hours, how it's gonna work. Sometimes, in those early patients, they don't make it for other reasons. And man, it's a blow. Like, you have no idea if you triggered anything inside the patient. You don't know. I mean, it's hard. You're not doing like full assessment. You don't know. You're relying on a clinical investigator to basically make a decision. Yes, let's go to patient number 2. So that uncertainty is something that is completely out of control, and that is a low. Like, you don't know if you are harming somebody. But I guess that is medicine in a nutshell, right? You got to keep on pushing the boundaries. That's why, like, a lot of people sort of donate their organs and donate their body and stuff, because you're pushing the envelope at every step of the way. So those are some of the lows, but I mean, the high is obviously, when this thing works, the rewards are such, like, great. You just saw somebody come in. I saw somebody yesterday getting a code, and I hope he makes it, but they're going to see them basically get out of the ICU to a long-term care and eventually to the loved ones. So it's an oscillating cycle, but it's worth it.
Okay, I have 2 more questions before we'll move to the audience questions. I see there are a few. So, one of my questions is, how did you learn about the journey to build a medical device? I mean, it's fairly complicated. You have to go through several phases, trials, all of that. So how did you figure out the playbook? Did you learn on the job? Were there other role models? Were there resources? So can you talk a little bit about sort of, what help you got along the way and how you learned?
Yeah, well, that's a very good question. So I sort of followed the typical playbook that, a lot of folks advocate. If you want to learn something fast, join a startup. So in my case, actually, I was in between sophomore and junior years, between my second and third year of engineering. I was interning at a medical device company in Boston, and it was a unique setup. So there were about 35 cardiovascular surgeons and radiologists that had come together and started this company. So they had invested, they were sort of doing these products. They were primarily using it for themselves and their patients. I joined the company, and I think I was 19 years old or whatever. And there was a VP of R&D, and there was me. And we were running it, and we were getting products out, doing our research, and first in animals, pig studies back then. And the company was on the verge of getting acquired by J&J. So J&J is, at the door doing full-blown DD, and there is a VP of R&D, and then there's an intern. So I sort of got my first learnings from that experience, and eventually I ended up working for J&J. So I'm like, all right. So that experience sort of told me how to do everything fast, cheap, with the frugal mindset, how to, sort of typical David and Goliath, right? So how do you do things fast and cheap? And then I went to J&J for a couple of years, and like, okay, how do we do things at scale? What is automation? How do you set up 8, 9 plants? Like, how do you plan supply before you even have a single sort of forecast or demand? And, big companies have a different way of sort of looking at problems and markets. So I got to see both sides of it, and yeah, that was the foundation, and that's how I got started.
Fascinating. So key lesson maybe is for something as complicated as developing medical devices, actually working at another place that you are able to kind of relatively risk-free see how that's done. That helped you get more confident about your own venture, I guess. Yeah. Last question, and then we'll turn it to the audience. What advice would you have given to the younger Nish Chasmawala, who was just starting out in 2011, right? So knowing what you know today, if you could meet Nish Chasmawala in 2011, time travel back, what is the one or two pieces of advice you would have given yourself?
Oh, there's a lot. You sort of learn from your mistakes, but you can't keep on dwelling on your past. But I think one thing that we've seen in Consul is a lot of people talk about it, but it's basically a product market fit. So we raised capital at first in human stage, but now we've got multiple products, and the first product didn't have an awesome product market fit, and the second product is like perfect. Like you're a tennis guy, Ajay, so it's like when you hit that ball and certain shots, you just know the moment the ball leaves your racket that this is money, this is going to be great. So the advice I would give is, invention, research, everything is hard and it's long, but try and figure out a way if you can get to a product market fit analysis early on. And once, the reason for that is, inventing something is great, but you need a very different skill set to actually sell the product and scale your sort of operation. And if you have a product market fit, it's like having that sort of magical hand blessing you along the way. So I would say, like, try and figure out how to get to a product market fit. There is no shortcut way to do that. You still have to go through the entire process. But once you have that sort of product market fit, then commercial success is almost guaranteed for you. So try and get there as soon as you can, as an advice.
When did it start dawning on you that Consul was reaching product market fit?
So for us, luckily, it came in the pandemic. Maybe I was not traveling enough. The jets were down, so no jet lag. But for me, it came during the pandemic, and we knew that it's a fine line, right, Ajay? You got a product that is such nobody's ever seen it before. You've seen it before. None of the nurses have been trained on your product when they graduated from nursing school. So you're doing education, awareness, everything on the fly with a small startup budget, not a large company sort of team and resources. So for us, what we realized, we initially knew that our first product requires a lot of training. There is a steep learning curve that the nurses have to work on before they start using a product. But when we launched the second product, we realized that this is COVID. The best we can do is actually send a video link to a nurse, and if they can see the video link in 30-60 seconds and start using the product, that is what's going to sell. If anything more than like a TikTok video, we sort of lost the plot on training and education. So we launched a second product, and when that video went out and the nurses started using it, the feedback, the questions that are coming were like such detailed questions. So we're like, wow, this is something that's going to click. And it has actually, right now we are in production sort of hell. Last year when we started, we said, this is something small, basic. Let's plan for 500 devices a month. In December, we were like shipping 39,000 devices a month. So there is no science. You have to feel it in the gut that this is going to work. But it's like tennis. When you hit that shot, you will know that this is a good shot.
Okay, says one tennis player to another. Right. So there are a bunch of questions, Nish, in the chat. So good to see that there is audience participation. So the first one says, 12 years is a long time to sustain yourself. What kept you going?
you got to believe in what you're doing. I mean, you have to, like, I mean, you just have to believe what you're doing is going to work. It's going to help, lots and lots of patients. You can't be, I mean, you can't get dejected just because your buddy is, having sort of, a secondary sale or, a quick sort of SPAC deal or, an acquisition offer. You got to believe. And in medical devices, like you've seen this before, like, it's a long process, but the journey is equally rewarding. Like, for example, like we have 17 patents right now. And last time we got somebody to, or 18 patents now, independently sort of not even valued. Somebody just came and made an offer or some stuff like that. And on an average, each patent was being valued at $5 million. I mean, don't even like, and some of these products were not even like ready for commercial launch. And it's like $5 million, just ballpark. So you have to believe yourself. It gets lonely, it gets low, but you have to believe yourself. You also have to surround yourself with a good team. Get a co-founder. Don't be trying to do solo. Good to have friends and family that sort of support you. It's like they say, your spouse is your another sort of default co-founder that nobody wants to see on a cap table, but they sort of live the journey, the highs and the lows with you. So have a good support team in place, but believe in yourself, go for it. It's one life, it's going to work out, trust me.
Okay, we should keep going. There's a question from Musharraf that says, how do you think one must analyze the industry if one intends to start a business in the healthcare or medical field? He's asking about the kind of analysis of choosing your industry, because you talked about that, right? That you had like 300 problems that you could have addressed.
So it depends on what sort of resources you have access to. So like, for example, if you were in a hospital, you would choose a different clinical problem versus if you're like an engineering institute and don't have access to a hospital. So very different way of looking at it. But typically, rough sort of pitch-wise, what you have to get money to do these things. So look for problems that are probably class 2 or a relatively simple regulatory pathway. Look for something that is that has a predicate solution out there. So don't try and be completely groundbreaking, because when you go and tell somebody that I'm comparable to somebody or slightly better in terms of outcomes, choose that problem. You want to target something that, based on your analysis, should be at least $300 to $400 million market size potential. You can tell the investors it's $1 billion, but at least for your own sanity, make sure it's at least $300 million, otherwise it's going to be tough. And ideally, if you're going in a regulated setting, what you want is you'll have to spend some money for this upfront or do some research, but try and find a reimbursement for your products. What that reimbursement means is somebody else is paying for it, so insurance or hospitals paying out of their own budget. And when you have those pull pressures, either like in terms of economic penalty or reimbursement that is willing to adopt your solution, it helps. So I would look for those things and then select the problem to solve.
So Kushagra asked a similar question. So his second part of his question was, he says, but what after research if he still can't find a commercial solution? Then what? So he spent a lot of time and then done a lot of research, but he still can't find a commercial solution. What next?
So this is medicine, right? So sometimes you have to pull the plug on your journey. If you start doing research, you get to an animal study, and if your drug or your device is causing some side effects or it's causing undue harm, I think it's a moral sort of obligation to stop and pull the plug. These things happen. Trust me, when you go and speak to qualified healthcare investors, they have seen it in their they've invested in more companies than we have started, and they have seen these hard pauses come up, things that you can overcome. And they will help you. Sometimes the IP is valuable for some other technology. Sometimes the proof of concept, can be pivoted for another unmet clinical need. But if you're on a path that is not yielding clinical safety and efficacy, unfortunately, you have to stop or pivot.
Okay, and then Sanket says that, so he's a third-year engineering student, and he says, what is, out of all the phases that you talked about, or the stages, like he said, what is the most crucial stage in making your business successful? And in that, what are the things that one should focus on? So what was perhaps in your journey the most critical phase?
Yeah. So I think, as engineers, we're not sort of, we don't give high priority to selling, that's usually somebody else's job. But, at the end of the day, this is a sales job. Like even your research, recruiting patients is a sales job, getting funding is a sales job, doing actual sales or marketing is a double sales job. So, it's a sales job. And that's, I think, something that Hemant mentioned in his introduction, those are some soft skills that needs to be polished and pursued, pursued during education. So I would focus on being a good salesperson, being a good storyteller, and that will attract talent and everything to your journey. But the most sort of challenging thing is commercial success, and you are sort of handicap of small budgets on small team. That's the most challenging thing, but you will overcome. In our case, we are based in India. Majority of the team is based in India. We do something called B2B sales, so business to business. So we sell directly from India under the Consul Medical brand to hospitals in US, UK, Israel, and India, now expanding other markets. And, it says Consul Medical, New Delhi, India, you've got somebody from India usually doing support. So those are, but, it's worth it.
Okay, couple of questions around wanting to learn more about your manufacturing setup and the experience that you had, because you worked with partners in other countries as well. I remember you had a partner in either the Czech Republic or Germany, but at the same time you have manufacturing here in the NCR region of Delhi. So could you talk a little bit about your manufacturing setup?
Yeah, so this is a class 2 device, so you typically need a class 10,000 or class 100,000 clean room. Typically, if you were to we during the pandemic, what we realized is supply chain disruptions. Unfortunately, healthcare requires products in these critical, crucial times, and that's when everything sort of comes to a halt from a supply chain perspective. So we decided to take control and made our own clean room manufacturing setup in Delhi, Okla Phase 3, and by class 10,000 or 100,000, what we mean is basically a particle count that is inside the environment. So it's typically like if somebody was to come to our office today, you could walk into the clean room and lie on the floor and do a surgery, because that environment is probably more sterile than an operating room in a hospital. So we have that set up. We, like I said, we are making close to 40,000, 50,000 devices now on a monthly basis. So we had to ramp up quite a bit, from small scale, manual processes to sort of pneumatic-based, semi-automated lines. We are looking to partner with some large companies, and their forecast and their scale is something that, actually about half of my team has never even seen before. How do we get to that level of scale? So we don't have the budget today to do automation, but our partners are looking at it and looking to invest in that. And they're looking at $6-10 million of automation where, these things can be scaled up faster, not dependent on operators. So yeah, we have it. If anybody is in Delhi area and want to see it, just Google us, Consul Medical, and let us know. Happy to sort of give you guys a tour, and you'll see what goes on in a medical device manufacturing setup.
Sorry, I was mute. What's the best way for participants to either learn more about Consul or explore opportunities for interning, or perhaps they might have their own ideas? What's the best way for them to learn more about Consul, or apply for internships, or try to get hold of you?
So I mean, happy to share my email ID. Just send me an email. You know, we have like students that come from all over. Like, you know, before the pandemic, I think we had like about 8 or 9 international passports in our office. People that had like moved to India, spend 2 years, 3 years, you know, working, learning different facets of the business. Some folks come for like 3 months, 6 months to design projects. So we have systems in place for that. I'm sort of happy to, like, you know, either triage that to our HR department, or if somebody has an entrepreneurial question or sort of, you know, something around technical, either I or my co-founder Amit, who's actually also an IIT Delhi grad, either of us can take it, and we do that all the time, like, you know, mentoring, investing, stuff like that.
Okay, thanks for that. Prithviraj says that he says, well, now compared to 20 years ago, when you start 10 years ago, there's a lot more resources available on the internet that you can learn from. And so he says, what shifts and expectations are there from a young engineer who's beginning his career or her career? So I guess, you know, you expecting that they already know a lot, self-study? I guess that's kind of the question, if I've tried to understand what Prithviraj is asking.
So, I mean, yeah, I agree overall, like, you know, we're moving towards a more and more sort of open, knowledge-based society. Like, a lot of the information is readily and freely shared. But unfortunately, healthcare is still pretty archaic. You know, the way the payers, providers, you know, the way they function, it's still like 50, 60 years in the back. So I think that's an advantage, right? You're sort of dealing with folks that are like stuck in legacy processes. So if you have a new idea that can disrupt that, I mean, there's, you know, it's worth a shot, right? There's nothing to lose. Like, you know, if you can crack either the technology or the distribution somehow, I think it's the largest sort of segment industry after defense, I would say. You know, it's healthcare spend. So it's a big market. So if you have something that is new and differentiated, give it a try. I wouldn't worry too much about, you know, where you are in terms of the person next to you. Brilliance will always sort of, you know, overcome the crowds.
Okay, so we have time for 2 more questions, but really short answers, Nish. Okay, so the first one says, did you have a plan B? And therefore do you advise this person, Fagun, that they should maybe have a plan B?
I would advise against it. Don't have a plan B. Like, you know, it sort of burns the horse from the Spanish conquistador. Like, I mean, you have to believe in this thing. You have to go all in. If you have a plan B, you'll always be sort of half reliant on that plan B. I did have a plan B, but I never sort of even remotely considered what that fallback would look like or when to execute it.
Yeah, the plan B question's always a tricky one. And then Ashutosh asked a more generic question about how to find the right co-founder. I think that everyone will have their own views, but do you want to share anything with Ashutosh on how you found your co-founder?
Yeah, I think, I think more than like skill set, I think it's temperament, personality, you know, these sort of roller coaster that you go through emotionally. You want somebody who can actually, you know, somehow was like completely untuned with you. So, you know, when you're on a low, these guys have a high and they pull you up. And when you're on a high and you sort of, you know, pull them up. So I don't think it's a skill set. I think it's more of a personality, mind meld. You got to have similar vision and basically have a personality that's going to pull each other through. You can get frustrated at the problem or the situation you are in, but you can get frustrated at the individual.
But let me ask the question another way. So I guess, would you advertise for a co-founder, or would you look for somebody who you've already interacted with, or who there is some reference or connection to?
I would rely on somebody that you've already worked with. I think advertising it's an HR risk, right? It's similar to HR risk. I mean, I'm a sort of control freak by nature, but so I wouldn't take that risk because you never know, things change. Like 4 years, 5 years is a long time. People sort of grow differently. So it's somebody you work with is ideal. Somebody that comes highly recommended, like if you're an investor or your mentor that also has the same assessment for you guys, that would be a close second, I would say. But advertising, no.
Okay.
At least
we're out of time. There were a couple of other questions, but unfortunately, we're not going to be able to take Ananya's question or some anonymous attendee's question. So should we hand it over to the organizers to wrap up then? I just want to say thank you, Nish. Really fun chatting with you. I'm glad to also see we had a lot of engagement with the audience in terms of the questions. Thanks for patiently going through them with me, and we had fun, and want to wish you all the best for all of the exciting new product launches ahead, and look forward to learning more about some of these new products.
Yeah, and I mean, Ajay, I think this is also more for your audience, right? I mean, these guys are like enthusiastic engineers that are on the verge of, sort of starting their careers. So I wish them all the best. I think Hemant and team, they have the vision obviously is something that's going to benefit both from an academic, but also from a country perspective. So I wish them all the best. And if there's anything that sort of comes up remotely, medical devices is something I know. So anything medical device related or pharmaceutical related, just, get in touch with me, and I'm happy to sort of, answer any further questions or tie up loose ends here.
Perfect. Okay, Damayanti, over to you.
Thank you so much, Nish. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you in the inaugural session. And thank you very much for finding the time in the middle when you were traveling to actually agree to do this for us. We started this thinking that, our students who are in the various colleges where we are need some role models of makers, right? And makers who have made it. And I'm sure they have a lot to take away with. Ajay, thank you so much for agreeing to do this for us. And this is only the beginning. And hopefully, we will have more of these sessions for the students. I would also like to thank the student managers of the various Tinkerers Labs who helped us publicize the events. They put in a lot of effort and time to reach out to the broader student community. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to reach out. And finally, I would like to thank the audience who showed up, because with students, they have multiple things competing for their attention.
And 45 people have still stayed even after the hour. So
yes. Yeah. So, so the fact that, they showed up is something that I'm grateful for, and we are all grateful for. And that's it. One last request to the audience, we at Maker Bhavan Foundation, we are also trying to build a community of makers, because one of the things that we have noticed is that students, talk amongst themselves, amongst their groups, right? They reach out to their peers and stuff. So what we are trying to do through our social media channels is actually to bring mentors and tinkerers from various institutions into a single platform. And what we would probably do is we will send our social media links to you afterwards. If you feel that it's useful, do join them, because most of our posts we've just recently started, but we do intend to use that platform to build a community around it. Thank you very much, Nish, once again. Thank you, Ajay. Thanks to all the student team members who helped out.
And it would be great to get feedback on, with this kind of meet people's expectations, and then for other webinars that follow, kind of, any changes or other questions.
Yeah, and what would they like to see? I mean, what kind of speakers, anything, do write to us. We're happy to hear.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Good night. Bye. Have a good weekend.
Safe travels back.
Thanks. Bye.